Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 15th the Competitiveness Institute Annual Global Conference, and welcome to the Basque Country. Industria, berrikuntza, merkataritza eta turismo sailburua. Deusto Fundazioko patronatuko burua. Deustuko Unibertsitateko errektorea. TCIko presidentea. Lagunak, jaun Andreok, egunon. Autoridades, señoras y señores, es para mí un honor darles la bienvenida en nombre de Orquestra, Instituto Vasco de Competitividad de la Universidad de Deusto y de la mano del Gobierno vasco a esta 15ª edición de la Conferencia Global Anual del TCI. Deseo expresar nuestro más vivo agradecimiento a todas aquellas entidades que, a pesar del difícil entorno económico en el que nos estamos moviendo, apoyaron desde el principio con su patrocinio la celebración de este evento. Estas entidades son, en el ámbito público, la Diputación Foral de Álava, la Diputación Foral de Vizcaya, la Diputación Foral de Guipúzcoa, el Ayuntamiento de Donostia-San Sebastián, el Convenio Bizkailab, la entidad Fomento San Sebastián, el Ente Vasco de la Energía y la Sociedad para la Transformación Competitiva SPRIT. Y en el ámbito privado, la cadena SER, las empresas Euskaltel, Gamesa, Iberdrola, Kutxabank, Repsol Petronor y The Boston Consulting Group. Gracias a ellas estamos aquí en el día de hoy para celebrar esta reunión internacional cuyo lema, Let us grow together, hace alusión a la importancia de la colaboración. Colaboración que quizás sea uno de los aspectos que mejor definen a The Competitiveness Institute, la red mundial más importante de profesionales e investigadores en innovación, clústeres y desarrollo territorial. Esta red pone en conexión a 3.000 expertos de 100 países, entre los que se encuentran agencias nacionales y regionales, asociaciones clúster e instituciones académicas, además de otros agentes clave de la competitividad. Por su parte, nuestro pequeño Instituto Vasco de Competitividad es fruto de la convergencia de un conjunto de iniciativas público-privadas liderado por don Jesús Luis Larrea y aglutinado por la Universidad de Deusto, cuyos más de 125 años de historia hablan de su enraizamiento y compromiso con el País Vasco. El Instituto ha contado también con el apoyo de don Michael Porter, de la Universidad de Harvard, quien estudia desde hace ya muchos años las estrategias competitivas del País Vasco y que aceptó ser su presidente de honor desde su puesta en marcha. La consolidación del Instituto se ha visto además favorecida por un consejo asesor formado por un reducido grupo de personalidades de relevancia mundial en la materia. Fue presidido por don Jon Azúa y actualmente lo preside don Christian Kettels y forman parte del mismo don David Audrech, don Sandy Barua y don Sumitra Dutta. Por todo lo expuesto, es motivo de orgullo para nosotros que el País Vasco sea hoy la sede del evento más importante sobre competitividad que se celebra anualmente en el mundo. A lo largo de los próximos días tendrán lugar en este territorio intensos debates sobre las claves de la competitividad local en un entorno global, sobre las claves, señoras y señores, de la sostenibilidad y del bienestar de las futuras generaciones. We are indebted to all of those who helped us come up with an interesting program made up of 4 plenary sessions and 34 parallel ones, and bringing together more than 170 speakers, with ideas and experiences from around the world. Finally, I would like to wish you all a wonderful 15th TCI Annual Global Conference, hoping that it fulfills your expectations. I also hope that you find some time to explore this beautiful country, and that in the years to come, when you think back our green landscapes, our good food, our innovative firms, and our proactive approach to competitiveness are the first things that come to your mind. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Eskerrik asko. Cedo a continuación la palabra a doña María José Aranguren y don James Wilson.
¿Esta sí le suena?
Good morning, everybody. Marie Jose and I have had the great pleasure of chairing the organising committee for this 2012 15th annual conference of the TCI, the Competitiveness Institute. And on behalf of everybody involved at Orchestra, at the Basque Government, at the University of Deusto, and at the various other stakeholders that have played such an important role in putting together this conference, we'd like to offer you the warmest of welcomes to the conference and to the Basque country. This is a unique gathering of people from around the world. You can see on the map that our colleague Asier has prepared, with a huge diversity of experiences. And the question that we wanted to ask in these introductory comments was, why are we all here?
Well, we have come together to share this unique opportunity to reflect and learn around a series of important issues.
First of all, what type of futures do we want for the territories where we live and work? And most importantly, how do we want to construct them? What sort of processes do we need to construct those futures?
How can we combine ideas and energies to move past to the difficult economic situation many places find themselves in?
How do we manage that transformation, the transformation of our clusters and our economies in this changing world that's continually giving us new challenges? How do we manage the transformation processes that we all need to undergo at this time?
What is the role of the public policies in this transformation, and how do we know if they really are working?
We do know that innovation is important. Innovation is one of the key themes of Competitiveness Institute conferences for many years. But what are the challenges we have with regards to managing innovation processes, with regards to finding effective solutions to the problems that we're encountering?
And as more and more people live in cities, how can we ensure that they are real drivers of competitiveness?
We hope that you find in the programme, which you have in front of you, and the brief summary is up there on the screen, we hope you find the opportunity, the space, the motivation to share your ideas around these and many other questions over the next few days, so that together we can advance our understanding, we can uncover some solutions, and then we can go back to our own context, to our own places, and try and put those solutions into practice.
We have really already started this learning process. Of course, with the cluster tours yesterday, we hope you enjoy, all of you enjoy the diverse experiences of different cluster tours. Over the next 3 days, we will meet in plenaries 4 times to learn about and discuss some specific issues. And there will be also 33 workshops taking place in 8 tracks, which we will try and bring together in a closing session on Friday morning in San Sebastian.
We also have a problem-solving space set up in San Sebastian that will be open from tomorrow. It's a flexible room with flip charts and spaces to articulate and leave your problems. The idea for this was to have a space where people could make ad hoc meetings, leave problems, and just be a forum, an open forum for discussion around what our challenges are. For example, our friend and colleague from New Zealand, Ethel Fox-Williams, will lead an ad hoc workshop there on Friday morning around the question, what's holding back cluster managers from having greater impact? So if you're a cluster manager or you work with clusters and you have ideas around that, you have problems around that, please visit the space, leave some ideas on the flip charts and come to that session on Friday morning. And likewise, other types of sessions we hope will emerge with people willing to take the lead to facilitate kind of brainstorming sessions around these types of questions. The main aim of meeting together in one place like this is, of course, for face-to-face interaction, so that we can engage with each other properly. However, we also encourage you to explore and discuss ideas using the social media. This will enable those who can't be here this week to listen, to take part, to give their comments. And it also opens the way to keeping the discussions going when we all go back to our homes at the end of the week. So please, if you use Twitter, this is the hashtag for the conference. We have LinkedIn groups on the TCI, both for the TCI and specifically for this conference, to keep the discussion going. So please engage using the social media as well.
Okay, and finally, and before we hand over to Christian to welcome to you as TCI President, we would like to offer you the warmest welcome to the Basque Country and to the conference on behalf of all the organizing and committee team. For us at Orchestra, part of the University of Deusto and the Basque government, this has been an emotional as well as a professional process. I remember how we first attended a TCA conference in Lyon in 2006. You can see this in the first picture. And we have been participating in TCA conferences yearly since then, so it has been for us a journey. And so, to be hosting now this conference 6 years later, here in the Basque Country, and sharing the trajectory of our territory over this time, is really a great pleasure for us.
It's been an extremely intense year, of course, since we learned we've been selected to host the conference around 15 months ago now. And I think it's fair to say it's been a real lesson in teamwork amongst the whole diverse range of stakeholders. In fact, I think we could say, or we think we could say, it's actually been a process of constructing place-based competitiveness. Please enjoy the conference and enjoy the Basque Country. We look forward to seeing you over the next few days.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, Michael. This was great, and we're all very much looking forward to this event. It has been a journey. If I look at the picture, I certainly see that while this is my first opportunity to welcome you as TCI President to a TCI conference, I've been part of it, but partly also with more hair on my head. At least that's what I saw early on the picture. Now, we are here to learn, we're here to have fun, we're here to reconnect. But one thing that I've learned, that whenever you start speaking in front of an audience, you have to remind yourself what's their frame of mind as they enter the room. Now, I know you're coming here with a lot of expectations about what we're going to experience together over the next couple of days. But it's also true that if you look outside, we are in the middle of an economic crisis. It's a very difficult economic situation, and of course in the Basque Country we are very close to the eye of the storm. A lot of issues are going on in Spain and other parts of Southern Europe that the people that you talk on the streets have to deal with every day. When we met about a year ago in Auckland, it was still perceived as a European crisis. I think now most people realize that it is a global crisis, partly because Europe is such a big part of the global economy. Why is that important for us? Well, it's important for us because I think if you think about why so many people are feeling uneasy about this crisis, it's because they feel that things are happening to them. There's nothing that they can do about it. They're the subject of global trends that they can't influence. This is exactly, I think, one of the points that we as a community of practitioners in this field are trying to address. If you talk to cluster practitioners, if you talk to people in regional competitive efforts, the reason that they feel that what they do makes sense is because they have a sense that they have an impact. There are a lot of things that are outside of their control, but there are things about competitiveness and growth that are very well within their reach. This is really at the heart of what TCI does, what the practitioners in our network are really engaged in. It is trying to find ways from the bottom up to find solutions to these big questions, not just be the subject of these global trends, but be an actor, be able to influence what's going on around us. Now, what we're trying to do is help people, giving instruments, sharing experiences, but it's also about framing the challenges that are ahead of us, the complexity that is around. And just yesterday I had a conversation with Tony Coggins, whom many of you will remember as our gracious chair last year at the conference in Auckland. Competitiveness is more relevant than ever. People have realized that we have to find new ways to sustain growth, to build a foundation for sustainable growth, but there is also a big cacophony of what that means. So what I hope that this conference will continue to be able to achieve is bring us a little bit closer to a common understanding of what competitiveness is and what the tools are that you can use in your locations to move forward. Now, what we learned from the academic discussion, certainly from the practice of the last few years, is that there are no longer any silver bullets out there. There are no simple recipes that you can just use and kind of roll out and just ask smart people from some place that might know the answer. It has to start with you. And that's why I think the topic of this conference, location-based competitiveness, is so spot on. We have to start by understanding our location, our context, as part of the global economy. But it starts with you. It starts with what you can do in your location. Now, during the next 4 days, what you'll be able to get is a number of tools to make you more effective on that journey. You will learn things, so there's knowledge to be shared. You'll hear about Spain, you'll hear about the role of cities, you'll hear about concepts, and you'll hear about what international organizations and companies are doing in this field. You'll hear about ideas, kind of new ways to help us deal with the complexity of things that are happening around us, and making sense of them, making them into something that you can action on. Maybe most importantly, you'll learn about experiences. TCI is very much not an academic effort. It's not a one-way communication. It's a network of practitioners where we learn from each other. Certainly one of the things that I've learned, and of course that's because of my background at a university, is that the solution is often not in the big ideas. You have to have the right ideas, otherwise you're going the wrong way. But then it is really about how you implement it. And that has to do with process, it just has to do with how you understand people, how you understand structures. And that is the real barrier that many people are currently facing and many regions are facing. This is exactly what our network is all about. Now, so the solution is not always in kind of analytical idea or in experiences. It's often in connections. And this is really the heart of TCI. So I hope that you will be able to use these 4 days to make new connections, to use the connections that are there. This is the one big opportunity that we have as a network to meet globally and exchange those type of ideas. As you know, this conference is not just any other TCI conference. It's an anniversary conference. Now, sometimes if you come to age, and with 15 years, you could say, we're starting to come of age. You have to question yourself: are we still relevant? And I think the reason that, in my view, TCI is still relevant is that we've always been very open. We've been open to new people, and many of you will be new to TCI and will be wondering, what's this funny organization with this funny acronym all about? We are always open to new people and invite them to our community to learn together and work together. But we are also always open to new ideas. We are focused and committed to the idea that clusters are a positive force in economic development. But this is not a religion. We are looking for what works, and I think we're always flexible to look for these new things. That makes us hopefully relevant also for the years to come. Now, if you have an anniversary, and we'll have a bigger recognition of that at the gala dinner, but it's also time to look back. And I just want to recognize 3 individuals already today as we start out, because they have been playing such an important role in our organization. One of them sits here in the front row, Professor Antoni Subira from Catalonia, who was one of the founders of TCI and has been with us throughout the way. So it's great to have you here. It's a pleasure to have you here, and also given that I know you had health issues, it's so fun, so good to see you again among ourselves. So another gentleman that I want to quickly recognize, and actually no, I don't see him, but I'm sure he's with, there he is a gentleman that comes from out west, who's been with us for all the conferences. So he is one of the few people that actually attended all TCI conferences, all 15 from them. That's Bob Briot, a serial entrepreneur and cluster practitioner as best as they can get. So Bob, it's very good to have you with us this morning. Now, the third name that I wanted to mention is, once we get west and, we have a person from Europe, you probably should go east, but with him I never know whether you need to go east or west to find him, and that's Ifor Fuchs-Williams. He's one of the founders of TCI and has also been a shining light for our network for many years. So Ifor, it's good to have you with us this morning. Now, if I ask my kids, and or rather when I told them that this is going to be the 15th anniversary, they say, "Oh, anniversary is great. You are going to have a party." And I said, "Yes, we are going to have a party." So that's we're looking forward to hearing all about that. But they also said, "Well, usually if there's an anniversary, there's something about presents. Shouldn't there be a present?" So we have decided to give us one present that I want to show you, which is a little movie of TCI. So please enjoy that movie for the next few minutes.
TCI Network, 15th anniversary. 15 years ago, a group of pioneers met in Barcelona to create TCI as a network to promote and develop the cluster idea among economic development professionals. This was the starting point of an exciting and eventful journey for the TCI network. TCI has grown over the years into a strong network, reaching large parts of the global economy, and it is now the leading global network for practitioners, policymakers, researchers, and business leaders, working towards improving competitiveness in regions and clusters all over the world. 9,000 professionals in more than 100 countries keep informed, updated, and connected through TCI.
One really important value of TCI was this of being a global network. Then TCI started also as a neutral platform, so a platform of people in which to meet and to share knowledge, but from a peer-to-peer basis. Another value is that TCI is fundamentally a practitioner network, so it's not a network of theorists or academics, that they are also welcome and they are form part of the network since the beginning, but fundamentally the point of discussion, the approach is based on concrete projects.
A core group of members with a variety of backgrounds, experiences and geography make up the TCI network and drive the organisation's activity with the support of a growing number of organisations, among them national and regional development agencies, government departments, cluster organisations, companies, multinational organisations and academic institutions. Relevant personalities in the world of clusters make part of the governance of TCI and inspire the network with their leading thoughts and guidance. TCI activities and the connections it provides have been a critical part of the professional development of many practitioners in the network.
TCI has been a great effect behind the rapid expansion of clusters globally and the capability of the practitioners of development programs.
Being active in TCI, we have gained useful information of potential markets and great contact all over the world for a cluster.
TCI presents the most intensive concentration of experts with similar interests and gave me an exposure to useful lessons and approaches.
TCI has been very successful in over more than a decade pushing the concept of clusters and competitiveness among practitioners. It has provided a useful platform to learn from each other, to share experiences, and to develop new and better practices on cluster development. At this point, we want to go one step forward, so we are working on improving and giving more added value to our members, and we want to support those who work in clusters in their daily work.
TCI provides value to its members in a number of areas: knowledge and expertise, networking and internationalization, visibility and profile.
The network gives you really access to both. It gives you access to a global network of contacts, people that you can work with, and I think that is what we see matters more and more in this globalized world. It's really contacts that are prepared, contacts that are ready to work with you on issues related to clusters and competitiveness. And the network is an opportunity, especially through its conferences, to educate and motivate your staff. I think what we see in many instances is that our members send their people that work with them, and they come back energized and really with a much better idea of what they can do in this field.
TCI conferences, where the experts in competitiveness meet. The TCI community keeps permanently connected virtually through social networks and at some specific meetings with a regional or thematic focus. But the annual meeting point for the network is the well-known TCI Global Conference. It's an inspiring platform for fast exchange of patterns and ideas on competitiveness, clusters, and innovation. Participants can expect 4 days of stimulating learning, networking, and connecting with people from over 50 countries.
In the conference organizing committee, we work every year to be at the vanguard of competitiveness and innovation. Our members demand updated content, qualified networking, and collaboration opportunities. And we have to be to meet their expectations. I'm sure this year they're going to meet them.
Participants take great advantages of the conference.
Policymakers all over the world, they met and they are networking, and it's for both formal and it's informal, to exchange new ideas about competitiveness and innovation and yes, economic questions.
You know, we have our own, we see their own, and you go someplace and one, they shape your ideas, or they create new stimulus to bring new ideas back home and populate them around the world, because I too travel a lot, and so these conferences really help the global economy.
Not only do you meet new people and bring back new knowledge to your local region, but you also then are able to share the expertise that you've developed with other people, and that's such a great buzz.
My message to TCI delegates is that this means that competitiveness is going to be even more important than ever, because more and more countries are going to try to export their way out of their difficulties, and it means that the underlying skills capabilities of the companies in their local clusters are really going to have to be brought to the fore.
From the first time in 1998, the TCI network has been received in outstanding cities and regions from the 5 continents, renowned for building competitiveness strategies from the strengths of their clusters and people. Barcelona, Varese, Glasgow, Tucson, Caen, Gothenburg, Ottawa, Hong Kong, Lyon, Portland, Cape Town, Jyväskylä, Delhi, Auckland, and the Basque Country. Delegates have the chance to explore their leading innovative clusters and to learn firsthand from their experiences in cluster policy and management.
We try to move every year from one continent to another, and we try to reach out people from different nationalities, different cultures and genders, so that the people is enriched by different perspectives.
The program is always tight. Insights from keynote speakers at the plenary sessions, different workshops looking deeply into specific hot topics, on-site visits to local clusters, brainstorming sessions, the general assembly of members. But there is always time for enriching discussions, agreements and disagreements, to catch up with friends and colleagues, music, dance, until the last day of the conference, when the organisers pass the torch to the next hosting city and everything starts again. TCI activity never stops, working in the present and thinking about the future. And how will the future be?
I imagine TCI as a strong global platform with antennas in many latitudes that multiply the international potential of the network and the local impact.
My ideal vision of the future of TCI is to become the most desired development forum for peer learning and business opportunities across national borders.
My desire is that TCI becomes the heart of innovation, knowledge and businesses, a friend who helps you to find the right people to work with in accomplishing your dreams.
TCI has a high level of openness to different strategies, traditional and non-traditional approaches to the cluster idea, and therefore accommodates a variety of perspectives, opinions and schools of thought, always with an attitude of respect.
Clusters will change their form. The way that we engage with each other will change their form. But this notion of really local interaction, I think, will only rise as we become more knowledge-oriented, and really the flow of ideas around people in a local area will matter more and more in creating these global advantages. And you can then kind of really leverage and project
those type of local advantages much more on a global scale.
TCI provides a platform to discuss how clusters are able to influence business success and economic and social prosperity in the future.
And we underestimate the social dimension of cooperation, the psychology of cooperation, systemic approaches of self-organization, findings of neuroscience with the right and the left hemisphere of the brain and how they cooperate. So cluster should build social capital and new values. Cluster have to be creators of social innovation. And as Steve Jobs said, and perhaps it's a good advice to us, we have to stay hungry and smart.
15 years later, TCI is still a passion for clusters, competitiveness, and innovation.
So we have to stay hungry. We are hungry for ideas. We are hungry to start the conference. But now I'll ask the Minister to also open the conference here in Bilbao.
Buenos días, según Augustine. Good morning to everyone to this 15th TCI Annual Global Conference. Y bienvenidos, welcome everybody, a un evento de relevancia mundial para la economía y el futuro. Tengo que decirles que es un orgullo para Euskadi tenerles a todos ustedes aquí, visitando nuestra tierra y descubriendo la forma de trabajar de nuestras empresas, nuestro modelo de clusters. Una satisfacción que lo vivan en personas, porque una cosa es contarlo, pero otra muy distinta es ver lo que se han hecho y lo que hemos hecho, y eso es vivirlo. A lo largo de muchos años, Euskadi ha sido un modelo a valorar por los extraordinarios resultados que ha aportado. Llevamos más de 20 años trabajando con una larga tradición en política cluster, incluso en Harvard sirve de modelo de estudio. En este sentido, creo que es uno de los importantes motivos que han ayudado a que el País Vasco esté resistiendo mejor los envites de la economía e incluso una de las razones de nuestras mejores tasas de desempleo. Nos encontramos en niveles muy similares a la media europea y muy por debajo de la media nacional. Por eso es importante que ustedes tengan la oportunidad de vivirlo de cerca. Además, creo que si pueden ver lo que realmente se mueve aquí, vamos a tener la oportunidad de valorarlo entre todos y de entrar en un proceso de mejora. A veces, ver las cosas desde fuera permite apreciar detalles que no se valoran desde dentro, lo que puede generar nuevos debates, que van a ser importantes teniendo en cuenta el nivel de ponentes y asistentes. Seguramente no les digo nada nuevo si les señalo que actualmente todos estamos viviendo tiempos de cambio, tiempos convulsos, tratando de hacer frente a nuevos desafíos. La respuesta y la forma en la que lo abordemos pueden ser determinantes para nuestro bienestar en los próximos años. Este foro va a aportar ideas para decidir cuál es la dirección adecuada, hacia qué modelos queremos impulsarnos. Sería muy iluso no suponer que esta crisis, como otras que hemos padecido anteriormente, no va a tener como consecuencia profundos cambios en los modelos de crecimiento y desarrollo imperantes en la mayoría de los países industrializados de nuestro entorno en las últimas décadas. En este sentido, un factor cada vez más relevante, que cada día va a tener más importancia y que va a ser determinante para la salida de la crisis y el mantenimiento de la renta y prosperidad de nuestro territorio, es la competitividad. El tema de la conferencia de este año es especialmente oportuno: Constructing Place-Based Competitiveness in Times of Global Change. Los clústeres, hoy más que nunca, se enfrentan al reto de mejorar la competitividad regional a través de la cooperación para aprovechar las oportunidades en los mercados internacionales. La competitividad es algo de lo que todos somos responsables, las empresas y las instituciones, todos los agentes. Tienen que hacer su trabajo, todos juntos, apostar por políticas y estrategias en diferentes ámbitos económicos, sociales y medioambientales. Esto nos conduce a una forma de trabajar, un factor cada día más necesario en un ámbito global, que es la cooperación. Resulta muy difícil responder a retos como la globalización, la innovación o la sostenibilidad de manera aislada desde la pequeña y mediana empresa. Es necesario buscar soluciones cooperativas y colaborativas en el marco de estrategias basadas en el largo plazo. Una colaboración que es importante a todos los niveles y en todas las etapas del proceso. Les voy a comentar un caso más en las estrategias de especialización inteligente que la Comisión Europea está promoviendo. Uno de los elementos clave es la existencia de procesos de descubrimiento emprendedor. Un claro ejemplo de este proceso lo constituyen en el País Vasco los clústeres, ya que los diferentes agentes implicados, empresas, agentes de conocimiento y administración, participan en la identificación de retos que se tratarán de abordar a través de proyectos de cooperación. Lo importante de nuestro modelo es que, iniciado hace más de 20 años, como antes les decía, en los años 90, se ha mantenido hasta la actualidad. No ha sufrido vaivenes como en otros lugares porque existe un amplio consenso de los agentes alrededor del mismo. Por el contrario, en los últimos años se ha ampliado la red de clústeres prioritarios con los preclústeres y se está trabajando en la cooperación interclúster. Por eso, como les decía, foros como esta conferencia anual del TCI es realmente trascendente para debatir y profundizar en estas cuestiones con diferentes personas de los 5 continentes que pueden analizarlo desde muy distintas perspectivas. Estoy seguro de que tanta pluralidad va a permitir un fructífero intercambio de ideas y extraer conclusiones que podremos aplicar a la mejora de nuestras organizaciones. No quiero alargar más el comienzo de este encuentro, les dejo para que puedan debatir sobre la competitividad en los diferentes ámbitos, no sin antes agradecer el trabajo realizado al TCI, a Orquestra y al resto de las entidades organizadoras para que esto pueda celebrarse aquí. Y cuando digo aquí no me refiero solo a Bilbao, que es una de nuestras 3 capitales, todas ellas destacables por su desarrollo, sino a todo el territorio de Euskadi. Euskadi, País Vasco, es un territorio que no solo tiene un modelo de trabajo empresarial destacable, sino también muchos atractivos turísticos por descubrir y que espero que tengan ustedes tiempo de disfrutarlo. Espero que tengan la oportunidad de conocer nuestra tierra, nuestra gente, además de nuestras empresas, así como de algunas de las experiencias que les podremos ofrecer. Les deseo que estas jornadas resulten interesantes y útiles y cedo la palabra a Christian Kettel para que dé comienzo a este congreso. Muchísimas gracias. Eskerrik asko.
So with that, we're ready to move into our first plenary session, which is under the main title of our conference, Creating Place-Based Competitiveness. And I'd like to ask the 3 speakers, Walter Deffa, Carlos Hertel, and Tim Jenkins, to join me here on the scene. What we want to do is really to try to help us start thinking about the role that location plays in achieving competitiveness. And we've asked our 3 speakers to look at this question from 3 different perspectives. It's almost a triple helix that many of us like to talk about. We'll start off with Walter Deffa from the European Commission. Walter is a person that scares many regions in Europe because he has the final say over billions of euros and how they are going to get spent, or at least that's what the regions think. So he will share with us a little bit the thinking of the European Commission on how they can help locations in Europe achieve competitiveness. Now we know that at the heart of competitiveness is companies. It's companies that create value that really make sure that regions ultimately are prosperous. So we've asked Carlos Hertel from the GE's Research Center in Munich to tell us a little bit about how a large multinational company thinks about the role of location. GE, as you know, is not only present in many businesses, it's present in many locations. So where to locate and what to do at different locations is a key choice that a company like his is facing every day. And then we've asked Tim Jenkins from the New Economics Foundation to help us in regions to think a little bit more broadly of what this notion of competitiveness really means. How do we need to rethink that term? What does it entail? What should we include in our conception of competitiveness and really put at the foundation of our regional strategies that we're about to define? So with that, let me hand the word to Walter Deffa from the European Commission.
everybody. So it's really a pleasure to be here at your annual conference, and it's great also to be in this fascinating city of Bilbao, which can, as we have already heard in some of the speeches before, which can tell us one or two things about regional development and structural change. And as the Minister has said, it was actually in the 1980s where the Basque countries were pioneers in Europe in introducing the clusters approach to rebuild their regional economy, because it was a way out of a regional crisis caused by the decline of traditional heavy industries. Today, we have a global crisis in Europe. The whole of Europe is in a crisis. So how do clusters, how does smart specialization, and how does the place-based approach relate to this exit out of the crisis? That's some of the things I wanted to talk about. And one thing is clear, there is surely no easy shortcut. Because the crisis is a financial crisis, it's an economic crisis, and it is a social crisis, and it's a very deep and very complex crisis. So the exit strategy cannot rely on old recipes. We cannot rely on single-dimension approaches, and we cannot rely, and this is a big challenge, on inefficient governance structures. So we need to combine macro, regional, and microeconomic approaches. Therefore, the European Union is building an exit strategy out of this crisis that I would characterize as having three components, three tiers. The first tier, that's the one everybody talks about, that's about fiscal and financial consolidation. We have to get our public finances in order, and we have to deleverage the whole of our economy. Second, structural reforms. We have to push for better regulations. We have to reform markets in several sectors. We have to make more out of the big European single market. We have to improve our educational systems, all that in order to become more competitive. And then there is a third component, a third tier, which has gained more political importance recently, and that's growth stimulation through targeted investment. Because without growth, austerity on its own will not be successful. And it's actually in this last tier, combined with the second tier, where the EU cohesion policy can and must play an important role. A policy that tries to be a catalyst and a delivery system together and aligned with the EU strategy for smart, sustainable and inclusive growth. Those who know the European jargon, they know this is the Europe 2020 strategy. So what we are doing at the moment, and I think it's the right moment, we are reforming this cohesion policy in order to better strategically align it with this Europe 2020 strategy. So this new reform will kick in 2014, and then we will have a 7-year programming period. But before we can get there, some very important decisions still have to be taken about the budget and about the regulations. But maybe before I go a bit more into the detail there about cohesion policy and smart specialization, I've seen that there are some or important number of participants who are not necessarily familiar with the European cohesion policy, so may I give you 2 minutes EU cohesion policy for dummies. So what we're doing is that for a 7-year period, this is rather special for public budgets, the EU sets aside an important amount of money. It's something like 50 billion a year. The exact amount we will know later in this year. And this money goes to what we call structural funds, and they support investments in growth and jobs all over the EU. That's important, and in all regions. But of course, the poorer regions, they get a higher aid intensity than the others. So the bulk of the money goes to the poorer regions. And then it's the EU member states and the regions. They develop operational programs. And these programs, they have to agree with the European Commission. And the programs will be financed by the EU money I talked about, but that will be matched by national and regional funds. So it is a joint endeavor. And it's actually the national and the regional administrations. They run the programs, they implement the programs under their own responsibility. So this is an important policy because it represents something like 1/3 of the EU budget. And it's a policy that has played a massive role in upgrading infrastructures, you can also see it here, and in modernizing the economies and the administrations. Both are important. And of course, this particular in the poorer EU countries. So as I just said, we are engaging in a major process to reform this policy in the framework of the exit strategy out of the crisis. So what we have to do, we have to counterbalance the negative impact of austerity, and we have to support the structural reform. So it's about producing results, and this is important. It's about producing results, it's not about just transferring money. In the poorer regions, we have to produce these results with targeted growth-enhancing investments so that they can go back on a higher growth trajectory. And that still means also supporting investment in infrastructure and modernizing infrastructure. Basic infrastructure is no longer a focus for the richer regions and the transitional regions, but they still need support for structural change so that they can actually face the challenges of globalization. So needs are very different in different places, in different member states, and even more so in different regions. But all of them, they want to do two things: create jobs and increase the prosperity of their people. So what is key, and this is not something I have to tell you because you all know, it's competitiveness and it's innovation. And the two go together, one with the other. All the competitiveness rankings show that when you are high in competitiveness, you are also high in innovation score. And the opposite is also true. When you are low in the one, you are low in the other. So what we need to do is to focus on innovation. Innovation seen in a very broad sense as transferring knowledge into economic results. So market share, growth, jobs, prosperity, and even wider societal benefits. Also innovation not only seen as a technological dimension, but also in a more organizational dimension too. So what we want to do is improve competitiveness by activities that are both innovation intensive and that draw, and that's the place-based approach, that draw on the region's specific assets and capabilities. These are the very basic ideas behind this concept that already has been talked about, smart specialization. And actually this smart specialization is one of the major innovations in this reform of cohesion policy. So just to give you the 5 main fundamental methodological elements of what we understand under smart specialization strategies for a country or for a region. It's first analyzing the strengths and the weaknesses of the region, and then, on that basis, identifying competitive advantages and potential for excellence. Second element that has been mentioned already a lot, it's involving the innovation stakeholders, in particular the business community, for validation and buy-in, and then of course also leverage of the strategy. Third, developing a joint vision for the region and identifying priority areas for innovation support. 4, improving internal knowledge flows and regional innovation systems, but also focusing on external links to maximize cooperation potential. And 5, setting clear, measurable and realistic targets and monitoring then their achievement and adjusting the policies and the funding flows if needed. What is very important is that these strategies are developed and implemented in an inclusive process. Christian has mentioned the triple helix, and that's what it's all about here. So it's getting together academia, the universities and the research institute, together with the public sector, and of course, and that's vital, with industry and business. And to jointly define the growth areas for the future. So it's this entrepreneurial discovery that is very much based on the realistic and the right assumption that it's the entrepreneurs who know best where the future opportunities lie. So when you look at it, it all sounds rather sophisticated, and it is sophisticated, but it's very much, in the end, structured common sense, but on a very high level and very much based on cutting-edge research on the growth factors for regional development. So, I'm already more than half through my speech and I haven't said a word about clusters. So, I should now address a bit on how is all this linked to clusters. How is the smart specialization strategy linked to clusters? First of all, when you have well-functioning clusters, that gives you an indication where the region is already well advanced, where there is the critical mass that you can build on, and where you have the competitive advantages, where you have diversification potentials. And that's an important element of the smart specialization strategy. Second, the clusters normally fulfill this function of improving inter-regional connectivity, linking companies to research and to other innovation actors. Another important element of the smart specialization. Thirdly, clusters can facilitate the process of entrepreneurial discovery. They can mobilize the actors for the process. And it's the cluster managers. They are key counterparts for regional administrations in developing these strategies. And fourthly, having a cluster strategy in a region is a very good starting point for developing a wider territorial agenda of smart specialization. So, in a nutshell, clusters are very important elements of the smart specialization toolbox, and it's very good that in Europe we now have, and this conference demonstrates this, that we have a widespread experience in cluster policies. But at the same time, we all know that clusters also are facing challenges. So one of the challenges of cluster initiatives is that you tend to focus most on improving the competitiveness of clusters in existing sectors rather than fostering the emerging new ones. Another challenge lies in helping the clusters to face the globalization, to better connecting externally, and to better positioning oneself in the very global value chain. And the third challenge is very much connected to critical mass, to life cycles, and to the role of public funding. Of course, clusters, to deserve public support, they should at least have a critical potential. Critical mass we cannot always achieve, and we have to make sure that at least that there is a critical potential if you want to support immersion opportunities. And in the end, public support should always be performance-based. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have talked about well-structured common sense, nevertheless on the basis of cutting-edge research. I've talked about cluster strategies as an important ingredient. So you may ask yourself, well, what is actually so smart or so special with this smart specialization strategy? Let me just give you a short answer in 5 points. The first point is that the smart specialization strategies that the EU is going to roll out from 2014 onwards, this will be unique in scope. Over 7 years, we could spend up to 100 billion euros to support innovation. And that's just counting the EU money. It will be complemented by national, regional, and in particular private funds. We should then have more than 100 of such regional and also national strategies all over the EU. And, second point, the strategies will be based on a common concept, which is, as I said, well researched, and which also incorporates all the experience that we have of regional policies across Europe. It also provides links with other EU instruments that relate to innovation, so, for instance, Horizon 2020 or the digital agenda. So, it's a concept, that is a common concept, but it's not a straitjacket. No, on the contrary, it is very much place-based. So, and it has to be customized in each region, and I know many of you here in the audience, they are working on this for their region. So we will support the setup of these strategies with guidance, conferences, workshops, peer reviews, etc. A particular point to make here is that the colleagues from the Joint Research Center in Sevilla have recently set up the Smart Specialization platform. The institute in Sevilla has published a guide for smart specialization, and they are currently working with some 85 regions, and now Slovakia has also joined as a member state, and they offering expert advice, but at least as importantly, they have peer reviews, so it is a joint learning process for smart specialization. Third point, we provide this guidance and assistance to help regions to develop their strategies. But we mean business. And we are responsible also that the scarce EU funds financed by European taxpayers, that they are well spent. Therefore, and that's another innovation, in the new funds regulation, there will be what is called an ex-ante conditionality. So, no EU cohesion money will flow for supporting innovation unless there is a proper specialization strategy in place. And you are not doing this for us. It's in your own interest, because a lot of experience and evaluation show if you don't have a proper strategy, then supporting innovation will not have the results expected. So it's very much in your own interest to get such a strategy in place. Because of results. It's about results. And that's the fourth point, the fourth point, result orientation. Of course, we all know that supporting innovation implies risks. But at some stage, we in the public sector, we should also be determined, and I know these are difficult decisions, to pull the plug on those structures that are evidently making no progress, that are at the end of their life cycles, and that are clearly struggling with global change. So what is important, therefore, is that you have close monitoring. And that's foreseen during the whole program. The monitoring will be based on European defined indicators, but very much also the regions will have to set their own specific targets and develop indicators related to these targets and monitoring. The fifth and the last point that is special in this smart specialization strategy for the European Union is that it addresses one of the challenges that I mentioned before, and this is the international connectivity of clusters and their positioning in the global value chain. Here, the broad scope of the approach that covers the whole of the European Union will help. And also, we have a specific focus in the strategies on external links. And in addition, we will have, we already have them now, European territorial cooperation programs. And in the next period, they have as a priority to promote cooperation, cross-border, transnational cooperation between clusters. So, to finish in time, you see we have an EU-wide but place-based strategy. So, and this is one of what I would call a signature component of this reformed cohesion policy that is more and more politically important for exiting the strategy. So I'm very glad to see in the program of your conference smart specialization having a prominent place. I also see that you have 2 workshops that specifically look at the link between smart specialization and cluster approaches. So I am honestly very interested in the conclusions and in the feedback from your conference. Because of course we are proud for the reform that we have launched, but we also realize that we are in a continuous, and it's a very exciting learning process to make our policy and the programs more effective. So thanks for the opportunity to talk to you, and I wish you a very successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walter. I think this notion that regions have the responsibility for their own future is very much in connection to what I said early on. You know, there is a crisis that affects us, but there are things that we can do. And the Commission, rather than sitting in Brussels fixing the solutions, is trying to help regions, giving the tool. I think this is a very exciting experiment. I can't but also comment that you say this is basically common sense based on good economic research. A lot of people might argue that common sense and economic research have very little to do with each other, but we'll see where that goes. So now we have gotten the perspective of government. Government often tries to figure out what might it be that can help companies to create more jobs, become more productive, and export more. So I'm very happy that we have with Carlos Hettler, representative of one of the largest companies in the world, certainly one of the most well-known and very innovative-driven ones. Please share with us a little bit your perspective from where GE stands, how you look at locations, and how you maybe look also at some of these efforts that the Commission, but also many other countries are trying to start to help locations to do better and be more attractive for people like you. Thank you.
All right, so the microphone round little freely. Thanks very much for the introduction, and good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here and an honor as well. Talking about science and common sense, I guess site selection for large companies, also some more common sense and much less science-based, it typically starts from some needs, a perceived or a real one. Midterm, hopefully, at times relatively short-term, but usually companies get it right and get to places where they then tend to grow something successfully. So the title of the talk here is, and I'll try to rush through that relatively quickly and hope you get the essence of it, is in search of talent. The one thing that you need to do, whatever you want to do, is people, and typically smart ones. So the talent factor is absolutely critical in site selection. But talent in a context. It's not just the raw talent, it has to fit a few other boundary conditions as well, about which I'm going to take. I have to put a little disclaimer here at the bottom, in that what I will talk about is from the perspective of an R&D division, so a corporate division that serves as a consultancy to business divisions, an R&D division of a large multinational corporation that is mostly engaged in large investment goods, technology-heavy goods. So we are not a service company in the first place. It's not primarily about manufacturing either. It is really about product and technology development. So anything I say, you've got to see in that specific context that may or may not be relevant to your region, but that is actually the only thing I can more or less competently speak about. Just quickly about us, you can read the list for yourself. Our organization is the in-house, as I said, R&D consultancy. Our job is to make sure that the technology pipeline remains well filled for the individual GE businesses. And if you're not very familiar with the company, suffice it to say that we are a large maker of jet engines for airplanes, power plant equipment, healthcare equipment, diagnostic imaging, oil and gas equipment, rail equipment, and a few other things. So typically large infrastructure type goods, where our customers, by the way, often are also large companies. That makes a big difference. If you're talking to a company where the end consumer is key, if you are in the consumer goods industry, you may have a different perspective on location. You have a different life cycle of your products, you have a different innovation cycle. Some of the stuff we do have very long product cycles, 10 to 20 years. So decisions on where to do what are taken in the context of larger time cycles typically. No GE presentation is complete without a quote from one of our founders, Thomas Edison. I just bring this one up here to set the context again. Two things are critical here. The first one is the world needs, so perceived or real needs as the company sees it, are drivers for investment decisions. And the second piece is then I go ahead and try to invent that, meaning stuff we address have to be things that can be addressed by technology, and that need that arises needs some internal work by a bunch of smart people to bring it to closure. So that is the mechanism behind getting value out of the work we do, addressing a need by technology. Now the key resource I talked about, the human beings seem to be in short supply. At least when you come from my home country, the same situation may be different here, but as it seems if you look at the IEEE spectrum and the German press certainly too, the country Germany is seeming to run out of engineers. There are attempts by the government, like this one here, make it in Germany, kind of a funny slogan, but it's broadly used to attract people to come to the country. Now, some people ask me whether we as a global company find that also a big challenge, a cruncher to say that we don't get enough people. I can tell you, however, that there is no absolute shortage of engineers on this planet. There may be an absolute shortage of teachers or of medical doctors, but not of engineers, because it's a level playing field. The engineers I cannot recruit, my competition can't recruit either, right? So we are competing on a level playing field here. What companies like us will do, they will go out, if you will, in the world and try to find the people where they are, and that's something I'm going to talk about here in the next slide. Historically, the company had one research lab. In upstate New York, in a small city that few of you will ever have heard of, but it was very close to some of the major manufacturing sites. That was the home base of the company for about 100 years. The US market was so dominant that there was little need of worrying about product development and innovation in other parts of the world. You fundamentally would take what you develop back home and sell it on the world market, and there was demand for it. Times have changed. We were relatively late in going global. Actually, just at the turn of the millennium did we start building new sites. You guess where the first one was? In Bangalore, India. Many other large multinationals went there. For obvious reasons, namely a large number of very qualified people at a cost advantage. which you couldn't miss. So Bangalore has become a hotbed for many multinationals to grow their R&D teams, with the side effect that these individual centers start recruiting from each other. So you are having a relatively short lifetime of your employee in the company, because hopping from company to company allows you to increase your income quite significantly. A challenge of a very special kind that we had not had back when the center was only there in the US. The next move is an obvious one. A year later, we went to China. Now, China already at that time, Shanghai was more expensive than Bangalore, India was. So you're wondering, before you haven't recruited everybody you would possibly recruit in Bangalore, why would you go to another people-rich, relatively low-cost country? China definitely is a play that is not only about talent, but it is also about market access and the overall context of being where the action is in the 21st century. India at the time when we opened the center wasn't. It has changed in the interim, of course, but when we opened it, it was exclusively about people. Now the jump back into the developed world, when our center was founded in Munich in 2003. So Munich is by far more expensive than India is or China, at least in those days. And it is about at cost parity with most of the US sites the company runs. You would not go to Germany because you feel that there is a lot of talent at low price available, especially the availability of talent, as my previous slide showed, seems to be limited in Germany. So the center in Munich does recruit from all over the world, but the place in Europe is essential to have access to some key aspects that will drive innovation, certain trends that you have to look after, certain customers you want to be close to, certain scientific institutions that are best in class around the world, certain market trends that are, in a sense, detectable from elsewhere in the world, but very hard to really understand and fully endorse if you are not embedded in that ecosystem. I like to compare that to the healthcare business, where you have in vivo or in vitro. You can do many things in the lab, but the proof of the pudding is if you actually put things into clinical testing with real human beings. So if you want to develop wind turbines, you may be able to do this around the world, but if your key customer is in a narrow region in Northern Europe, as it was for many, many years, unless you are from that region, you'll have a slim chance of success as a manufacturer. The story goes on. There are other, and the new countries are coming. First and foremost, we opened a manufacturing center. That's a relatively small site, special story of its own, but you recognize that Brazil is missing. So here comes Brazil as a resource-rich country. And where do you go when you want to be in Brazil? You have to go to places where people are. So you would be either in Sao Paulo or you would be in Rio. This time the center is set up in Rio. I can assure you that Rio is not a low-cost place at all. It may be one of our most expensive sites around the world, but being there for the opportunities in the region is essential for a company that needs to look for new business growth. One thing I've missed, very recently we opened our center that is exclusively focused on software. So software being software architecture, software being analytics. The attempt is to build, if you will, something that is termed the industrial internet. If you want to build a center like that, where would you go? There is a very expensive place in the west of the US, which, however, has abundant talent available, which is Silicon Valley. You have to go where the people are. You can set up that center elsewhere at lower price. You will have a hard time attracting the right caliber of talent. Again, search for talent, and all of that also in a context. The location factor cannot be underestimated when you run operations like that. This is a picture of the Lake Zurich. I've been working at ETH for a long time. That's why I like that picture. Particularly, mountains are very close, beautiful sea, the city is very nice. I have a good colleague from another large American company who was running a research organization at the shores of the Zurich. And a few years back I asked him, why did your company choose one of the most expensive places on earth to build a research lab when all our typical engineering sites are somewhere in the province where prices are low and manufacturing can be easily set up? Well, he said in R&D we only have few people anyhow. So whatever the cost, it really doesn't matter in the big scheme of things. Secondly, if you want to have the best and brightest, you have to go where people like to live. If you are where nobody wants to go, you'll have a hard time attracting anybody. And the very same is true, if you will, for some of the other sites we have. It is true for China, it is true for Brazil. Actually, I like this list where in my city, Munich, here also doesn't rank all that bad. There's a variety of rankings. And you find your favorite one, and maybe your city pops up at the top. But one thing is clear. If you want to attract people who have choices, who can be in Stockholm or Singapore or elsewhere or in Auckland, you have to offer something that goes beyond a good salary and an interesting job to work on. People may come for a year or two, like postdoctoral students do, But if you want to keep them for good, retain them, the environment has to be attractive to them and to their families, by the way, not an unimportant factor. I will not take you through the slide. It's taken from a totally different presentation. I just want to highlight what you would see to your left. The inputs in the innovation process are not all in-house. The inputs to your innovation process, and we talk about innovation today, coming from outside parties, national labs, universities, government agencies, an important factor as well. Your customers in particular. So to get the inputs right, to put your radar screen up where actually the signals are being sent, proximity is the name of the game. You've got to be close to it to get the story right and make the right bets. Partnerships are becoming key. That's what it says too. I have made this very simple partnership map of either collaborators, people who have a different industry they serve, but we have made intersections in the areas of technology we like to work, like us and the automotive world, similar interest in materials, totally different customer base, non-competing but shared interests. If I'm close to them, we can collaborate. My customers may want to tie me into their long-term planning and feasibility studies of new solutions. Or I may just have simple contractors. Some people nearby who I can send a contract to, they'll do the work and send me back the paper, the prints, or whatever I would need. In innovation, let me emphasize that proximity is extremely important. I was recently asked why you would actually still have today bricks and mortar research centers when everybody could work from home. I mean, I can tell you from daily experience, unless you bring people together in the lab and sitting together looking through the same microscope and having a chat over a coffee, you're not going to accomplish much. People have to talk and interact. So much of the knowledge at that early stage is really more gut feel and experience rather than codified. Once it's all written down in procedures and processes, you can send it off to elsewhere. But as long as it's in people's brains, they have to sit together to be effective. Getting them together, I mean, if you will, also here by plea for clusters in a sense. So we do work together with universities, of course. In Munich, we are sitting on the campus of the Technical University, a fairly large one of the best in Germany. We've picked a few areas where we actually operate jointly labs. In the healthcare space, with the hospital, in the composite space, large manufacturing machines which we need to buy, we do jointly, compressor technologies and also combustion. Those are the main areas. And you might think that, well, the university, that is actually the spring out of which all that prosperity comes. And some people do believe that. There have been papers about it as well. This one here from the Brookings Institution that looked at what role do strong universities, strong academic institutions play for long-term regional prosperity. And there's certainly a role they do play. The question, however, is what comes first, a thriving industrial sector or, in a sense, at the very early beginnings, a strong institution? Now, I guess history shows that strong clusters have formed around strong institutions. And you might think investing in academic institutions is the way to go. The rest is going to take care of itself. I want to caution you, however, and that was not a statement made in the report. It's just something that someone hypothetically thought a critic might utter. This is, well, there's just a small number of super smart people who can create whole new disciplines of technology. Nano and gene and bio and whatnot. Those are the guys that you want to have because they are basically the nuclei of growth. And if there are just a few of them, they say regional inequality might be a given. What I would say is they have the same interest as the people that we are recruiting. They don't only want to have money, a good income, a nice new office building. They want to be at a place where it's fun to live and raise a family and have good colleagues to talk to. Right? The aspect of the environment, of the ecosystem to them is equally important as it is to us. So you don't get away from those location factors. Let me just briefly wrap it up here. First and foremost, attractive locations for R&D investments by companies are attractive locations. If you have a place where people like to go, you stand a good chance of attracting the kind of key talent that you're interested in. Let me emphasize again the factor of proximity. Proximity matters a great deal in innovation. Proximity to talents, proximity to your customers, to your lead customers in particular, if they are hungry for technology. Trends and markets you want to be close to truly absorb them and respond appropriately. And tech providers, which may include academic institutions, government labs, and a few others. The ecosystem I mentioned, innovation partners, that is essential to us, and there's a few regions in Europe that are distinguished in that respect, and others are emerging. To be able to quickly connect is an enormous strength. So if I look at my region, for most of the stuff we need to do, I find within about 30 minutes to 1 hour driving distance, I find some partner who is world-class in a specific manufacturing or automation or imaging or whatever technology. It makes it easy to very quickly build critical mass in a new domain. The broader it is and the bigger it is, the better. And lastly, I mentioned that a couple of times, research and technology organizations can be very important points of crystallization for new growth. I would caution, however, everybody to not overestimate that either. I don't think there is an absolute evidence that one thing follows from the other. It's probably an interplay of many factors, but totally without academic institutions it might be tough as well, because you also need actually something to educate the workforce that later on is going to work for your company. With that, I wrap it up. Thanks for your attention, and I'll hand over back to Christian.
Thank you, Carlos. That was fascinating to kind of get the perspective from the view of a large multinational corporation. One of the things that I took away is you have quite a range of locations in which you are, even with your R&D activities, are present. And I think you cautioned us against seeing that there is one simple magic formula that wins for every region. My impression is that what you have to have in order to be attractive for a company like GE is to have a clear strategic position. You have to have a clear value proposition on what are we great at. And that might actually be, for many regions, I think, a much more hopeful message rather than to say, no, you need to have in Harvard or MIT or Munich Technical University, which only a few places in the world can have. So I'm sure we'll get back to that discussion a little bit further on. I do want to mention that we are going to have questions and answers, a little bit more of an open discussion afterwards. There are people on the sides of this room, so if you have a question, please write it down and hand it to them, and then we'll collect it here in front, and I'll play that into the discussion after the last presentation. Walter talked about common sense. That makes it sound pretty easy when you talk about regional competitiveness and trying to set up these regional strategies. We know that the reality is that many regions do not get it right, that they fail, that they find this entirely very complex. And part of the complexity is, exactly as we heard from Carlos, that there are many different things that matter. And it's kind of about how you put that puzzle together. This is exactly why it is so important to really start out with the right framework, the right conceptualization of what is competitiveness, what are the pieces that get together. Then you can kind of let the practical things run its course. At Harvard Business School, when we teach, we always try to put a challenging question, a stretched question at the end. Tim has promised that he's going to challenge us, so I'm looking forward to see how he's going to challenge us to think in new and broader ways about competitiveness and the way that we need to think more systemically. Tim, please, the floor is yours.
Hi. Sorry, which button? Sorry, excuse me. Is that button? Hello, thanks very much for inviting me here. I was lucky enough to be in Bilbao with my family actually for summer holidays. It's an amazing place travelling around San Sebastian. Unfortunately, I'm only here for 8 hours this time, so luckily I got it in during the summer. Yeah, I'm going to lift our sights slightly, really. I'm afraid I'm not initially. I will do at the end to talk about cluster development and regional development. But I'm going to say what's the context within which that is happening. And I'm going to suggest and make the case, actually, that the context in which it's happening is changing dramatically. And we're at the beginning of a systemic change. And it's crucial that people involved with the expertise that's going on in this conference are able to place what they do in that context. And I'm going to do a little bit of that to do here. So the first thing I'll do is I'll actually talk about, we've mentioned the economic crisis several times from the floor already. and I'm actually going to look into that a bit more deeply first, say what the challenges are from that, and say what that means for competitiveness and cluster analysis around that. Competitiveness has been around in economic thinking as being like a bit of a sort of like very important thing for about 30 years. It's very connected with the other notion of GDP growth, which has been around with us in terms of economic theories for about 60 years since Simon Kuznets came up with it shortly after the Second World War. Competitiveness in particular is very fundamentally connected with the second major systemic shift in economic thinking that occurred around late 70s, early 80s. And what that systemic thinking came around was based largely on 4 ideas, really. The first of which was that the individual is the key agent within which you analyse the economy. That collectiveness is largely irrelevant. It's mainly about aggregating what each individual does, and that will provide you with a solution. And the second thing that was very important in this shift was that markets took centre stage. Markets, and that's why we have the idea of market failure, the concept being that markets are the right way to go, only if they fail, and then you need to do something about it to move back to that, because it's the first best solution in any particular case. And the other 2 things that are quite important to mention is that it was believed that the economy was in equilibrium, and largely goes along. So that means that there's no real sort of path dependency to it. If something goes out of sync one way, it can be brought back again. If we don't get prices right, we move the prices back, it readjusts, goes on with equilibrium. And the last one, connected to that, is that marginal change is the key thing, rather than any structural, systemic change. Marginal change, key method. And as John Kay, the economist, London School of Economics, said, one of the problems with this approach was economics decided to present itself very much as a solution. It sort of worked things out, it knew what the answers were, give us the problems, we'll solve it. Unfortunately, that general way of looking at the economy and the context within which conferences like this are debating what to happen has largely hit the buffers. It's hit the buffers for 4 reasons, in no particular order. The first of those is around environmental limits. Climate change being the most obvious one and internationally agreed one, biodiversity close on its tail. Climate change requires to stay within 2 degrees, as most people know, is a huge economic challenge. Decoupling, increasing efficiency is really important, but it's insufficient. You need far more than that to be able to achieve it. But possibly more importantly, in terms of economics, it actually says that there are non-linear, irreversible changes that could happen. You could go over thresholds you don't get back again. And there are positive feedback loops and accelerators in it, all of which are slightly problematic for the view of the economy that was had. And this isn't a view of sort of marginal groups. Fatih Birol, the chief economist at the International Energy Agency, earlier this year saying that we had to make fundamental changes, otherwise the door will be closed forever. The World Economic Forum saying we are at tipping point and we need fundamental changes in how society values things. Language that doesn't fit very easily with the current economic model that we have. The second reason it's very important that it's hit the buffers is that it systematically increases inequality. And it's done that between countries and within countries. Now, of all the time that in actual fact the total size of the cake was getting larger, people were saying this wasn't too much of a problem. Now you have commentators such as Martin Wolf in the Financial Times saying that this, in actual fact, is a fundamental problem of how the economy operates, and it's a threat to democracy. We all have our figures about inequality within our own countries. In the United States, it's something like the top 400 people. So what, I don't know, twice as many people in this room, sort of, has more wealth than the bottom 100 million. And there's various figures for countries around Europe as well. The 99% 1% issue is now key on the political agenda. But it's not just inequality in terms of income, it's inequality in terms of increasingly of life expectancy, health and education. Austerity generally is making these things worse, at both ends in fact. Rich are the better off are becoming better off, partly because of the reaction to the recession, and the lower income ends are getting worse off. The third reason that it's hit the buffers is finance. The financial system that we currently have, particularly after the Big Bang 25 years ago, is inherently unstable. We've had crashes in bonds, currencies, stocks, and then the mother of them all in terms of credit in 2008. We have banks that are too big to fail, that we actually have to be able to bail out continually. We have toxic debt being transferred off private banks and being picked up by the public purse with the austerity that that then encourages. We also see that increasingly what's happened from 1999 here, that the way in which banks have invested has often been speculative investment, particularly in property. The blue line at the bottom is about the real economy, if you like, the productive economy, distribution and communications. Interestingly, banks don't appear, and bank behaviour doesn't appear in any conventional economic model. Everybody just thinks that they benignly provide the money that's required by the real economy, which turns out to be a slight oversight in terms of economic thinking. But the last one, as well as the fact of environmental limits and inequality in an unstable financial sector, is well-being and how. I mean, the only reason we have an economy, the only reason we have economic growth is to deliver people well-being and social justice with the environment to the planet. Unfortunately, there's many graphs like this, I'm sure you've seen them, which effectively show that we sort of hit a bit of a barrier where GDP loses connection with being able to deliver greater and greater, in this case, life expectancy, but literacy, infant mortality, they all have roughly the same thing. Basically, more and better have sort of parted company around the top here on the way. Median incomes have largely flatlined. People's idea of having their own well-being is largely flatlined as growth has gone up in the last 20 years in developed countries, not in developing countries, but in developed countries. And finally, if you combine those, this is work that we do. We have there's many different indicators of measuring well-being. We have one that's neatly called the Happy Planet Index. It largely takes people's subjective measurement of their own well-being, life expectancy, and the impact that and how much environmental resources they use up per capita to be able to deliver that. And as you can see, again, we're in a situation where sort of like larger GDP generally doesn't actually get you more. Everybody needs to be, in terms of environmental limits, we all need to be in that top left corner largely and move us back towards that point. And that's the last thing to say, is that those four things that we have, environmental limits, inequality, financial sector and well-being, are all intimately connected. They can't be taken out and dealt with separately with set numbers and prices. They are intimately connected, as this diagram shows. It's also shown here by the financial sector. This is the UK, financial corporations' debt against government. You can see the bailout and the movement of bad debt generated by private banks being put over into the public purse, and then the austerity the inequality that will then drive. This is another one from Tim Jackson's book, Prosperity Without Growth, demonstrating that in terms of if we actually have more equality to be able to stay with environmental limits, it offers us a bigger challenge than we currently have. The good news is that, in actual fact, these things are actually starting to change. That model of economic development and around individuals and markets and equilibrium is changing in a good way, in a debate. There isn't a clear solution as to where it's going, but it's already changing. This is obviously the famous quote from Robert Kennedy about GDP. Simon Kuznets, obviously, who made GDP, said never use it as a measurement of progress. Promptly everybody did. But largely we know it's now outdated. The other things to say about it are both the International Monetary Fund and research, particularly by Richard Gordon at Columbia University, showing that low rates of growth or no rates of growth over periods of time are sort of here to stay, largely. And we need to be able to adapt to that, to deliver well-being for people within that context, because that's probably where it's going to stay. But the good news is that Nobel laureates like Joseph Stiglitz and Amartya Sen are already working on the fact that GDP has to be replaced. We actually have to have better metrics. You have to have better metrics to be able to make the decision about what the right things are to deliver well-being and prosperity for people. And in the Sarkozy Commission, which looked at replacing or alternatives to GDP, their key recommendation was that rather than just looking at income, what needs to happen is you need to look at income, inequality, and wealth. And in particular, you needed to look at the distribution of them. And that's what you needed measures to be able to say about whether you were being successful or not reducing it to one single figure about income. So what does that mean for the people in this room about regional prosperity and cluster development? I think the first thing you can say is if you look at all the research, and New Economics Foundation does a lot on well-being measurement, but if you look at the stuff in Stiglitz and Sen's work, is largely what they're saying is that well-being, in terms of prosperity for people, what the economy is supposed to be doing, not surprisingly, is not just connected with income. It's also connected with unemployment, inequality, instability, environmental pollution, and social fragmentation. And some of the indications about how we can move to actually having better measurements so we can manage what we do and actually, in fact, have a more strategic approach to regional development and cluster development comes around being able to measure things differently. The second thing is, as I was saying about growth, that the idea that sort of like continuous growth, infinite continuous expanding growth, is sort of largely a thing of the past. That isn't me saying that's sort of mainstream debate looking at where that goes. And so that actually changes how we relate to GDP growth, how we relate to success in terms of employment generation and well-being in the regions that you represent and do work. The thing is, there isn't actually, as I was saying, not surprisingly really, there's not actually a solution. The consensus around that I described earlier on about the individual and markets and equilibrium didn't come about overnight. That developed over 20, 30 years. We're at the beginning of that process right now. We're at the beginning of that systemic change. In books like Tim Jackson's Prosperity Without Growth, it doesn't actually give a saying, well, this is what we should do, but it clearly sets out what are the questions we're asking. And people like Stiglitz and Sen and people within the financial sector and the environmental sector start to answer their parts of the problem and be able to look at it. But undoubtedly, things that come out of this are that we need resilience within local economies is really important. We've sort of often sold resilience to get greater efficiency, to compete in a global market. Increasingly, what's very clear is resilience within a region is critically important. And that's often about making it stronger links within the own region and circuits of capital within that region. It's often far better at delivering well-being, employment, reducing inequality. The other thing to say, actually, is that innovation also is critical in this process, particularly for dealing with environmental limits, but also for dealing with inequality. For some of the technologies and the social innovations that we need are critical for us to be able to find solutions to these problems. We don't have one person to come out. I thought that Thomas Edison quote was quite interesting, actually. We probably could do with Thomas Edison to sort of come up with what people need is a new macroeconomics, and there is a group of people who are trying to be able to take that forward. The last thing I was going to say on things that are important is that the role of what type of firm, what type of organisation is also changing. The idea of a traditional shareholder company is under question about which ones deliver better. The idea of mutuals, of cooperatives, of shareholder companies. Again, an open debate, but a very important one in terms of building up clusters, in terms of building up regional development and making a strong and resilient economy. So, I would finish by saying the notion of competitiveness, how can we make this debate relevant to, or how can interact better with that systemic change that's going on? I think undoubtedly a lot of that is about strong local economies. I think a lot of it is about well-being, about understanding what that will be. New Economics Foundation has just set up in the UK a thing called the Good Jobs Task Force, where good jobs are considered to be ones not just for graduates, but for non-graduates. We have in the UK what we refer to as an hourglass economy, where we get quite a lot of jobs for well-qualified graduates that are well-paid, quite a lot of jobs for people with no qualifications that are very, very poorly paid, and not a lot for the middle, and not a lot to be able for them to develop their own career paths. So in fact, having an idea of good jobs is a good way of being able to change employment policy and industrial policy to be able to look at how that operates. I think the other thing that I'd say is that one of the changes that's happening is that markets have to be seen again, a bit like competitiveness in a sense, have to be seen in context, have to reel back in slightly about when it is that they work very well and are very, very important, and when it is that the role of the state is critical. And probably the banking sector is, I can't think of a much better example of where regulation and direction is really, really important to be able to get a sector to do what you need it to do. It has particular problems economically, but that's what it is. And the second thing that I'd say is that investment is going to be crucial as well. The investment, particularly at a time when low and slow growth rates, to be able to direct that so it delivers a shift to a low-carbon economy and delivers greater equality across regions will be critical. I suppose what I'm saying is to refer back to Christian's point earlier on that he sort of mentioned again just then in summing up after the last speaker, is that often the work on the ground is absolutely critical. Practitioners, developing clusters, working it out in terms of what that means for regional development is absolutely critical. But above that is a big idea, as he referred to it. And we have that big idea, it's well understood, we then go out and practice. My point is that the big idea is that we had before is breaking down, and that the next new big idea is on the way up. This isn't a sort of negative thing, this is creative destruction. We're actually moving from one phase into another. And as that happens, it's not a matter of being passive in terms of the work that goes on for regional development and clusters. In actual fact, it's critical that you're able to reflect on that and feed back up and feed into those debates about what is required to deliver the people in your regions well-being, social justice and staying within environmental limits, and the critical role that entrepreneurs and clusters play within that goal. I think that this conference and looking at the agenda items that are on it will be a really good place to start having that debate. And I think keeping that idea of systemic change, that big idea, is really important. Thank you very much.
Tim, well, you promised to challenge us a little bit, and I think you did. You left us with many things to chew on. We only have a few minutes left, but what I wanted to do is at least kind of help us connect a little bit the different dots that we've put on the map here in terms of what policy is doing, in terms of what companies are doing, how they think at locations, and in terms of the emerging new framework that might be out there. First question actually to Carlos, if you're listening to what we just heard, that there's kind of a lot of new needs out there that are currently not untapped, how is a company like GE thinking about that? Is that seen as, there's a new wave of regulation coming, or are you looking more at, well, there's a range of new markets that are potentially opening up that we could serve and where we could play a role in solving those issues that are ahead of us?
Okay, actually, I like one of the statements you wrote down. Maybe it was a criticism of economics that it's a solution that's looking for a problem. Yeah. Actually, I think corporations and companies are very similar to that. There are machines, there are mechanisms to actually address issues and find a very effective way of dealing with it. And if you set the boundary conditions right, and that's, of course, a plea to the policymakers, if you set the boundary conditions right, companies will make the investments in the right direction, whatever right means. For a company on a local level, that is always a profitable investment. But think of the example of renewable energies. Without setting the right boundary conditions, no company would ever have invested in this. But if you make the incentives right, I guess you will see that the money flows where the most investment is needed, innovation and new solutions. So I'm actually quite optimistic that we do have the muscle to do it, but I guess I got to be clear where the direction is. And that needs to come for us from the outside.
I mean, just if I can share a comment from our perspective in terms of teaching many of the people that then work in companies, what we see with our graduates is that they, of course, look for a good pay and an interesting job, but they also look for a purpose. And they like to work in a company where they feel we are actually addressing things that matter to society at large. Turning to Walter, if you rethink, smart specialization and what we're trying to do with these regional strategies in Europe, is that picking up on some of the ideas that Tim was mentioning on kind of systemic changes? How do we really make this inclusive, address the boundary conditions in different environments and other conditions?
Well, I would actually very much agree with the challenges from environment, inequality, finance, well-being, and the other stuff. And it's actually, I think, nobody anymore goes just for growth. We qualify. We want to have a qualitative growth. In our Eurospeak, we talk about smart, sustainable, and inclusive. And that's exactly addressing these things. The sustainable is very much that. And for instance, just to give you a hint, in the new programming period, 20% of all the money will be earmarked just for CO2 reduction. So this is kind of built in. Where I might have a bit, and it's not always good to agree on everything. Where I might have a bit of a nuance is on your slightly negative approach to competitiveness. I think it's worthwhile to argue what should grow, but I think it's very clear for all regions we have to grow. We have to grow. Not least because of the demographic change. If we want to support the demographic change without growth, it will not work. But I would agree, it's not any growth. It is to be growth that is, in the long run, sustainable and that also addresses the inequality issues. Right. But I don't think there is a kind of no-growth solution to regional development. I just throw this in because I think we shouldn't agree on everything. So.
Tim, great to get your reaction. When I listened to you, I also thought, so are you thinking about GDP growth as an incomplete measure? Yes, we need to add other dimensions, or is it actually that there's a trade-off that, if we want to achieve those other things that we do deeply care about, we actually need to focus less on GDP growth? How are you thinking about the connection between these goals?
I think I'd share what Joseph Stiglitz and Anne-Marie Artisan think about it, which is that we can't afford to have a trade-off, some idea that, in a sense, we'll be able to earn enough to be able to deal with some of the problems that it causes. We actually just have a very, very inefficient measure of what we're trying to do. And that has to change. And I think that the important thing about growth and saying they have to grow, my point is really that a lot of the data out there is saying that growth isn't going to happen in the same way that it happened before. Growth can't happen in the same way it's going to happen before. And so it's not so much of saying, well, we'll have a green growth and then that will all be okay. I think it is actually thinking about it quite differently, about how you deliver well-being to all the people in a region. And that might well be that what you do is you grow in terms, you grow, not sort of in terms of aggregate demands, you actually grow within those regions and become stronger. So in Cleveland, in Ohio, in the US, if people are aware of it, the Evergreen project, where there's a set of social enterprises developing around a university and a hospital in a city that's finding it very, very difficult as a brownfield city to be able to get some high-tech cluster development. But it may well do that as well. But what it is able to do is actually it says we need a stronger economy which delivers well-being to those people and provides jobs to them. And in this time of austerity, it strikes me that the idea that if we just keep focusing on getting the top-end players to come somewhere, hoping that that will trickle down in some way, is simply just not going to work. And generally, it increases inequality and doesn't deliver what we want. So the beginnings of how you measure that and what you do, but it is a fundamental change in how people regard competitiveness and basically puts it back into context as opposed to a word that's just repeated at various times to feel like you're fitting in with a particular mode of economic thinking, because that's changed. The reality of the world is that it needs to change.
So we are in an interesting position here because it's you know, as you described, there is something new emerging. We don't have quite the context there. We're starting to see some of the dimensions of what a new kind of type of thinking should look like. And you know, I think what I thought was great in your talk, that this is not a marginal shift. You know, it's not about kind of changing some details, but it requires changing many ways at the same time to kind of move to a very different place. I want to spend a little moment on another issue as well, just going back to the first two presentations. And wanted to hear from Carlos a little bit. So many of us here in the room work with government, use government funds in terms of economic development efforts, trying to make themselves more attractive, you know, build on skills and things like that. How does a company like GE look at that? You know, I know that some of your daughter companies in Northern Europe engage in some of these efforts. Do you look at that? Do you kind of scan, you know, what are these regional strategies, what are regions are doing, or is this kind of not really relevant and you're kind of focused on the market needs but not on what government is trying to do at the regional level?
I think the question here is, will those regional trends turn into market needs at some point in the future? Will a need for unconventional hydrocarbons open up a market for shale gas or not? And will the incentives that are set and will the initiatives taken lead to basically opportunities to come with advantaged products, turn that into revenues and help the company grow and be profitable? But yes, absolutely, we do monitor that. And I think it's an ongoing discussion. Each time something pops up, the question is this here to stay? Is it a fad that goes away? Is it worth investing in it? Because we do, when we start investing, that's why I mentioned also the long cycle nature of some of our businesses. When we start investing, we may see the returns coming only in 10 to 15 years' time. So you have to be pretty sure that the bets you're placing are relatively safe bets, or at least you have a portfolio of some real safe ones and a few riskier ones. In shorter cycle businesses, the situation may be very different. You serve a market need for a year. If it goes away, who cares? Right. You change your product. But for us, absolutely, we continuously monitor that, and there are even teams inside the company that are tasked with doing nothing else but that.
Right. Walter, what's your perspective? Because government is often trying to figure out what companies might think. How is that kind of ingrained in this whole process of regional smart specialization strategies to bring the private sector in, not only kind of as a recipient of policies, but really as somebody who should design where we're going at the regional level?
Well, I think that's crucial, right? Well, we're talking about these buzzwords, triple helix, etc., but it should not be a buzzword. So if you don't have the business sector in, it's not going to work. But the business sector on its own, and Carlos mentioned that, is not enough. So we have to have the interaction with the government because it sets side conditions, and we have for the innovation we have to have the contact with academia. What is also important, and that was Carlo was saying, is that business needs more than an annual perspective. And most of the budgeting that we do nowadays is very fragile. It's not even within 1 year you can be sure that you have the money that you want to spend on these things. This is why I think it's so important that at the European level we give a 7-year perspective. This is something extraordinary. It doesn't mean that you have to have a rigid plan, but you have the possibility for a 7-year period, and then you can adjust and adapt within this. I think this is an additional notion and an additional capacity that we offer also to attract business and to have confidence in the conditions that regions offer them.
So I think we had a very rich first session, a lot of things to think about, not kind of ready-made solutions, but that's the way that these conferences always are. There was a very clear common thread, however, and that really is the role of location. So The Commission is putting location and regions at the center of who should set these strategies. Companies, even though they are global, aware of and look at proximity and the role that different locations play. And I think very interesting to me, I mean, Tim asked us to rethink this new way of looking at competitiveness, and we have Nobel laureates thinking about that. But regions do play a very important role as laboratories to help us really approach this new model in important ways. So please join me in thanking our first three speakers of the conference for the great contribution they have made. So we didn't have much time for questions, but there is coffee outside, and I hope you can discuss a little bit what we've just heard about outside, and then we'll reconvene here for